Great. I think we are live now. So, welcome everyone. Once again, my name is Andrew Rodov, and I'm a product manager here at Practicum. And we're doing these webinars called How to Break into Tech, trying to bring you the best talent and the best programmers out there who will talk about their career and talk about their experience in getting into programming. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and because this is a live stream, I just have to tell you this once again. If you experienced any problems with video quality or sound, please comment in the chat on the right side of this video. And yeah, thanks for joining us once again. Yeah, thanks. I think there are about 30 people right now, and we'll just wait for a little bit so everyone else can join, and then Adrienne will start her presentation. After the presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about Practicum. So we'll give you an idea of how we teach JavaScript, and everyone who is interested in that can participate in our program too. So yeah, I think we'll start right now, and I'm really excited to introduce Adrienne Tacker to you today. She will be our guest speaker, and Adrienne is a software engineer and writer. She's also a cloud developer instructor and STEM education advocate, and today she'll be talking about JavaScript, using arrays in JavaScript in particular, and finding your own patterns to learn JavaScript. I'm just was really excited to have Adrienne with us, because when I was learning JavaScript myself, I experienced real difficulties with understanding certain patterns. And when I saw her presentation first, I was super excited to see her method of learning and reworking those patterns. So I think it will be really useful to all of you out there learning JavaScript right now. So Adrienne, you can share your screen and please take it away.
Thanks, Andrew. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us this time. I'm super excited to share with you this presentation. So without further ado, let's get started. All right. So you're all here today to learn about JavaScript. And for me, I especially want to teach you a more delicious way to learn JavaScript, and you'll see why. So just a little about me, other than the things Andrew stated. I'm also currently a senior developer advocate for MongoDB. So if anybody who has questions about that, please feel free to ask me afterward. And feel free to ask me any other questions that may come up that don't necessarily have to be related to JavaScript. So when I started my career in as a software engineer, and when I first started learning JavaScript in particular, there were certain themes that would come across what was happening to me when I did begin the process of learning JavaScript. And that was, if I can get my presentation to go through here. Here we go. So the three themes around JavaScript. And the first one that I would always hear, and I myself would figure out myself, is that JavaScript is hard. JavaScript, not only is it unfamiliar to us who may be starting or who have never worked with it before, but especially if you're new to coding, it might be different than some of the other concepts or languages or things that you have done before when you started to learn how to code and how to program. JavaScript is the first foray into actually seeing a little bit more than structure, and with the extra power that you get from JavaScript comes the extra things that you need to learn. Another reason that I've heard this theme of JavaScript is hard is some of us actually, maybe not as prevalent now because everything is JavaScript, but at least while I was going through my career, a lot of us have actually avoided using JavaScript for most of our career. I myself am a C# developer in my background, and I didn't start using JavaScript probably until halfway through my career. So with all of these things, JavaScript can be very, very difficult. Another thing that I hear, and is a common theme when I talk to other devs about JavaScript, is JavaScript is complicated. So there's a new framework every day. The language itself changes so quickly that maybe even if you were learning JavaScript, like I was a few years ago, by the time that I've thought I would understand some concepts, something has changed or some syntax has changed. To make it even more complicated, JavaScript is also paradigm agnostic. What does that mean, paradigm agnostic? Well, that just means that JavaScript doesn't really have a set, strict, defined way of how you program with it. There are lots of philosophies and thoughts about how you should do it, but it is flexible enough that you can go through all three. So, as an example, again, I was a C# developer, and when I started learning how to program, we were taught the object oriented programming philosophy of how to program. And as I was starting to learn JavaScript, it was kind of hard to figure out, how do I do this? Do I do this in an object oriented fashion? Can you do it? And when I started seeing some of the first demos, I was actually writing JavaScript in more of a procedural fashion, which means I would step by step what I wanted the computer to do, I would write my code in that way because that was just the easiest way for me to understand what was going on and to also write JavaScript in that way. And now, what I'm hoping to learn, and I'm still new at, I'm trying to now go towards a more functional approach. This is where it's not step by step, you're telling the computer what to do, but rather you're telling the computer what states you would like to end in. And so you have to write your code in a different way. You have to write it in a deterministic way, things with pure functions, all these other things that are still things that I'm learning, but we'll get into that later. But all of this is to say JavaScript is complicated because of that fact. The other fact that I mentioned before is that it has changed so much. I remember when we didn't have arrow syntax or any of the other nice syntactical sugar things that we've added over the last few years that have been making JavaScript a little bit nicer to use. And, all of these things put together just kind of make it a whirlwind. It makes it really difficult to say what is what and where do I learn and what is the right path to learn. So it comes to no surprise that when you think about JavaScript, especially when you first start with it or first encounter it, that you come across this very main theme of JavaScript is confusing. And I felt like this for a very, very long time when I started using it. So keep in mind, this is when I've already had a C# background. It's not like I was completely new to programming in general. I've had some experience and working experience, and it was just getting into it. I was very confused. So what do I do? When I see issues like this in my career, and whenever I come across things that are hard for me to understand or kind of are like an obstacle in my way, well, the thing that I like to do when I run into issues like this is I like to throw a lot of sugar at it. And so today I want to show you how I overcame a lot of the difficulties I had with some of the JavaScript methods by using some dessert examples. And specifically, I'm going to talk about filter, map, and reduce, which I think are kind of the foundation of array methods. You use them all the time, and they really, really are very essential to understanding JavaScript and really taking advantage of the power of them. So we're going to start with filter. So the name, it's kind of self-explanatory, right? When you see the name, you can kind of infer what it's going to do. And when we begin learning these JavaScript methods or any programming language, really, what's the first thing we do? Well, we probably go to the official documentation. So that's what I did. And when you go to the official Mozilla docs, this is what it says for the filter method. It says the filter method creates a new array with all elements that pass the test implemented by the provided function. And I'm over here, I'm like, cool, that means nothing to me. Or, when you're first starting out here, there's a lot of words there that kind of either go over your head or you get overwhelmed. And I think there's just a better way to kind of explain what's going on here. I mean, filter itself, when you think of the word filter, you kind of use it in everyday language. It shouldn't be made so complicated with this kind of definition. So I said, let's see if there's a better way to explain it. And of course there is. And there's always a better way to explain it with food, typically desserts, which is what I love to do. So let's say we have an array here of food. We have a donut, we have a couple cookies, a random carrot in here, and also a croissant. And then because I'm me and I love sweets, in this particular case, I'm craving cookies. So what would we use to filter out the cookies from this food array? Well, we would first declare a new variable to hold that resulting set, right, of only cookies. And then we would know we would do something to this food array. And we can use filter. So at this point, it seems, it would be nice if this knew what we wanted, but it's not going to work right away. We need to give filter an expression. We need to tell it what exactly it is we are filtering for. And if we did this in real life, if this platter of food was in front of us, what would we do? We would scan the food, we would look at each item, and we would make some kind of decision about each item on the plate. And depending on whether or not that fulfills that condition, then we move it into that only cookies array. Then we either say, yes, it meets the condition we're looking for, or no, it doesn't, and we leave it on the plate. So in the same way, we do that kind of decision making in an expression, and we pass that out. And this is one way to write it, right? So what we're saying here is for every item that is in our food array, we're going to check, hey, is this strictly equal? Is this actually a cookie? And if it is, we'll add it to the only cookies array. And if it's not, well, we'll leave it in the food array. And when we console log that, this obviously will filter out only the cookies exactly the way we want. Another important factor about this particular method and all the array methods is that they form new arrays, and that can be very important when you don't want to mess up the original array. So we're not taking those cookies out. We're just making a new copy of saying this is what those conditions filled, that this is a new array of just cookies. So that's pretty, softball, right? You see filter, and we kind of understand what filter means. Now we'll move on to map. And for map, it's the same thing. I went to the docs, and by this point, I should know better, but we'll go through it. So for the official Mozilla docs, it says map method creates a new array with the results of calling a provided function on every element in the calling array. Even reading that sentence makes me like, what is it trying to say? And the point I'm trying to make here is that, when you're using JavaScript often, that might make sense to you right away. You can read this and not get overwhelmed, or all of the words enough, you have the foundational experience enough for you to understand a definition like this. But when you're first starting out or you're just learning JavaScript, again, this kind of definition is very overwhelming. So I'm going to say, tell me again, but only tastier. So here I'm going to show you a bag of marshmallows. And who doesn't love marshmallows? I love marshmallows for s'mores. And for really good s'mores, we want the large marshmallows, right? We want the jumbo marshmallows. And so to kind of picture or make an example of marshmallows in code, I have an array here of string marshmallows. And just like a regular bag of marshmallows in real life might have some squished ones, some are squished on like the top, some are squished on the bottom. I kind of tried to emulate that in this array of marshmallows. You'll see some have some uppercase letters and lowercase letters, etc. So what I want to do is I want to for the sake of this example, like I said, because I want to have jumbo marshmallows for my s'mores, I'm going to write a function that makes me have jumbo marshmallows. I can create jumbo marshmallows per se. So how do we do that? Well, again, we would start with a new variable that will now hold our jumbo marshmallows. And in the same fashion, we know we have to do something to the bag of marshmallows array. What are we going to do? In this case, we can use map. And what we're going to use map for is we're going to go through each of the items in the bag of marshmallows and do something to it. In our case, what I wanted to do is I wanted to jumbo size it, right? So we're going to do that. But before, just like before with filter, it'd be nice if you could just say only food dot filter, and it should read our mind and know it's cookies. In the same way, map, we need to give it an expression. We need to tell it what we want to do to each of the items in the array. So we need to pass that expression in. And in this case, what we want to do is for every marshmallow, we want to uppercase it. We want to jumbo size it. And since these are string marshmallows, this is the way to jumbo size it, is to use the uppercase function on these marshmallows. Cool. And when we would console log that, this is what we would get. So that's sweet, right? Jumbo marshmallows are awesome. They are way better than mini marshmallows especially when you're making s'mores. But I'm sure you've noticed that there's a random cloud in there. That's not a marshmallow. It's trying to pose as a marshmallow, but we can't use that in a s'more. So can we do something about that? Well, we can. This is where you start to see the power of using these array methods together. You can chain them, and we can do that right now. So now we have a problem. We have a random cloud in there that we don't want. So what we can do is, well, what would we do in real life? We would probably filter out any non-marshmallow type objects, and then we would jumbo size our marshmallows. So in code, we can do the same thing. So what we would do first is we would take our map function here, the one that's uppercasing them or jumbo sizing them, and we'd move it down for right now because we don't want to do that yet. And then because I'm explicit, I want to change my variable name to not only say jumbo marshmallows, but filtered jumbo marshmallows. Now you don't have to do this, but again, I just want to be explicit and show the difference and be really clear about what our ending result is going to be. And now, before we do the jumbo sizing, well, we want to filter out any random clouds. So you can do this in any number of ways, but I'm going to use the filter function. And in this case, I want to filter out anything that is not a cloud. And I do this because the next step, what I actually want to jumbo size, is anything that's not a cloud. So I'm going to filter out everything that is actually a marshmallow. And now that I have that array of just string marshmallows, that will then get passed to the map function to then be jumbo size. So when we do this, we'll console log it, and that's more what we were expecting, right? We filtered out that cloud, and now we have all jumbo marshmallows. Awesome. So now we come to reduce, and this is the one that has struck fear in my heart, in every new JavaScript dev's heart. I don't know why it's this one that, you learn filter, you learn map, you may even learn some of the other methods that are available in JavaScript, but when you come to this one, it's almost like, nobody wants to touch it, and it's a little bit more difficult to understand. And I can certainly see why. Let's start with the definition. So the definition on the official docs says the reduce method executes a reducer function that you provide on each element of the array, resulting in a single output value. And you just got the hang of filter, you just got the hang of map, and you get thrown with something like this, and you're like, oh, that is a mouthful, and not the good kind, not the sweet kind. So let's take this, but let's throw the dessert approach at it. Let's do it with something that I know at least will keep me engaged. So we're unfortunately all probably stuck at home, and with that comes some very unhealthy eating habits. Namely, for me, I'm buying way too many donuts, and the days are a blur, and I don't know what's happening. I need to keep track, or else it's not going to be good for summer if we ever get out of the house. So here I have a donut log, right? Let's say I'm being good and I'm keeping track of all of the donuts that I'm eating every single day. So it's a pretty simple array here of objects. We have the day and we have the number of donuts that I've eaten. Now, in order for me to keep track and make sure I don't go overboard, I want to calculate, out of the whole week, how many total calories am I actually consuming in just donuts? That's a pretty important thing that I should keep track of and know so I can see to, slow it down a little bit or say, oh no, keep going. You can have another donut. That's fine. So what we can do is we will use the donut log that has our information. And in this case, reduce is a classic, very good method to use for this kind of problem. What we want in the end is the total calories consumed. So just like before, with the other array methods, we have to pass an expression. In this case, like the definition said, we have to pass a reducer function. So that starts out like this. And I think this is where a lot of people get lost. I know when I saw this, I'm like, oh no, there's another parameter. Like, this is way more complicated now. I don't know what's happening. But if we break it down and we really see what's happening, it's actually not that much different than the other methods that we've already gone through. So, yes, first we're going to start. Yes, there's another parameter, but first we're going to start with changing the names of these. These are not set in stone. These are just what the official docs show and what most examples show, but you can change these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to things that make more sense to me. So if you'll see, the first parameter here, accumulator, is really the last count of calories that I have. And as I go through each of the items in my donut log, I'm going to have to keep track of the calories. And this is where it's going to be, where I'm going to keep track of it in that accumulator variable. Or in this case, I'm going to change it to last count because that makes more sense to me. And then the other parameter, the current value, that's the current entry that we're working with. That's also similar to the past two methods where we just passed in each item that in the array that we were working with. And this alone is already something that at least has made it more manageable for me. I said, okay, I'm still keeping track of what's actually happening here. And that's just a change of the variable. We can go even further. So now we know as we go through each item in the donut log, we have to do something, and that something has to give us back a sum of calories of some sort. And for each day, we want to add all of those calories. So we're going to return after doing whatever it is we're doing in our function here to get to our total calories. We're going to return what the last count was of calories we have, which at this point is 0. And the reason it's 0 is because of this. This is our starting last count. This is where, let's say if I had a donut, I snuck one in and I didn't add it in the donut log, I could start off with, let's say, 300 calories here. But for the sake of example and saying that I'm good, we'll say that it's the start of the week. I haven't had anything, which means technically the last count of calories that I have consumed is 0. So that's why we start that there. We seed or we start out this reduce function with having no calories eaten. And this is important because when we do start adding and we do start going through our items, we'll see that every time we do, we are going to take that last count, which at this point is 0 because we're just starting, and we're going to add a rough estimate or a calculation of the average number of calories in each donut. So we would take the last count, which is 0, and then we would take the current entry, which at this point would be Monday, and we'll take the total eaten from Monday, which is 2 donuts, and we'd multiply that by, this is some average calorie count that I Googled. So apparently donuts have an average of 278 calories per donut. So we'll multiply that. And then now we are adding to the last count. We're adding essentially to our tally how many calories we have consumed that day. So let's step through that because I know that's a lot. But essentially what's happening is we would start with Monday. Our last count is 0. And on Monday, I ate 2 donuts. So we'd multiply 278 by 2. We would add that to the last count. So that is 556 calories, right? Correct me in the chat if that's wrong. So now our last count at this point, after going through Monday's entry, is 556. Now, when we go to the next entry and we're on Tuesday, we do the same thing. So except this time, last count is no longer 0. Last count now holds Monday's total, right? Monday is 556 calories. So at this point on Tuesday, we would add 556 calories from Monday and add it to, how many did I eat Tuesday? 1. So we would add it to the 278 calories I ate on Tuesday. And we would keep going through each day and do the same thing. And the point that's important to note here is that after we calculate each total calorie amount that I ate that consisted of donuts, we would just put that amount, we would add it to the last time we calculated it and store it in the last count variable. And by the very end, when we're done, when we output this, it would be 3,336 calories. So I would say that was a very good week for me. So that's all great. And, once you start getting comfortable with all of these functions, all of these array methods, you start to see how you can use them together. We kind of touched on it in the map example where we filtered first and then we mapped and made our marshmallows jumbo size. But I wanted to show you that you can use these things and you can use just vanilla JavaScript to do some pretty cool things. So I want to show you an example of that. So here I have a menu of different kinds of donuts that are available at one of the local donut shops here. And, I have the typical information. I have a strawberry type donut, the name, I have the emoji for it, the total calories, and the price. Now, what I want to do, let's say I put this challenge for myself, only using pure JavaScript, no frameworks, no libraries, nothing. I want to order some donuts via emoji, only using emoji. And with that, I want to give myself a receipt, same receipt that you would find when you buy donuts at a store. You can do that, and I'll show you how. So this is the menu. That's to start. These are the available donuts. And let's say this is my order. I want 1 strawberry donut, 1 of the espresso donuts, 2 of the chocolate ones. I forget what the other one was. What is it? Salted caramel. I couldn't find a appropriate emoji for caramel, so I used that candy one, and a coconut one, right? So this is my order because I'm a glutton and I want to eat all these donuts. Now, what I want to do is, let's say I take all of these emoji, I want to use that along with the information from the menu that I have and output a receipt. So we'll need to do a couple things for that. First, we'll set a constant of, this is an average sales tax. It's different across America and all the different states, but we'll say this is the average for now. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to get the receipt item ready. So to start, we will have to do something to the menu, right? And what we'll do first is we'll use filter. What would you use filter for? Well, receipt, I only care about the things I actually ordered. So to start, and I know this looks a little more complicated than the previous example, but just to look at it step by step, and you'll see that even though there's a lot more words and characters here, it's really doing the same thing that we did. So here I'm using the filter method to only get the food from the menu that is actually part of my order. So I'm saying for everything in my order, only get the things from the menu that are part of my order. Now, once I have those things, I want to use the map method. And for each item that's only part of my order, remember we filtered it now just down to the items I ordered, we want to go through and we want to get some information that we would need for our receipt. So the first thing would be the actual number ordered, which in this case, We could do that by finding the number of emoji in my order and finding how many is in there. And this, since it's an array, we just get the length of that. And that's the only thing I really had to calculate. Everything else was available for me. So what's happening after I do these two methods is I'm going to return an object to myself that has the information I need for my receipt items. And in this case, I want the emoji, which I can grab from the menu. I want the price, which I'm calculating by the number ordered that I calculated just previously, along with the price that's from the menu and the actual number ordered. And I'm going to return that after I do all of these manipulations using all of these methods. So great, now we have the receipt items, but now we also need the subtotal and totals because that's part of the receipt, right? So we'll do the same thing. We're going to now prepare the totals just like we prepared the receipt items. So we'll start with, now we have the receipt items, and now we're going to use reduce. Now don't worry, I'll explain what's happening here. So here, remember the first one, totals, that's the variable that is keeping track, right? That's the thing we're using to keep track of, in this case, our totals. And just like in our donut example, this was the variable that's keeping track of the calories that I consumed. So it's the accumulator. It's the thing that we use to tally up whatever it is that we are adding up together and reducing to a single result. Now, the second parameter that you'll see here is in every other case we were doing, it's essentially the current item that we're working with. And it's the same here. The only difference you'll see here is I'm using something called destructuring. And what that means is, if you remember, everything I'm returning in receipt items, I'm returning the price, but I'm also returning the emoji, I'm returning the number ordered. I don't want all of that right now. In fact, I only want the price because that's all I need to calculate the totals. So by using destructuring, I'm only grabbing the price to use in my function here, to use in this reduce method. And so that's all that means when you see the curly braces there, and I'm only getting the information I need at this point. So now we have a variable to hold our totals and keep track of it. And now we also have the actual item that we are dealing with, which is the price. So as we go through each item, we'll first calculate the subtotal, which is just any of the totals plus the price of the actual item as we go through each item. And then we'll also calculate the sales tax, which is just each item times the sales tax. And just like before, we'll return these totals, the subtotal and the sales tax, because we'll need that for the bottom part of our receipt. And if you remember, reduce needs to start with something. So when we start our calculations of our subtotal and our sales tax, the first time we go through this, it needs to know what the subtotal and what the sales tax is. So that's what this object here is for. It's saying when we first start, the subtotal is starting at 0 and sales tax is starting at 0. And now, just to prove a point, you probably want to use some templating or things, but I just want to show that this is all pure JavaScript. So here, just using some string literals here to build out a receipt. You can obviously use something a little bit cleaner, something a little bit nicer. But again, I wanted to show you can do this with all full plain JavaScript, plain vanilla JavaScript. And so here I have the receipt name at the top. I'm going to use the map function to now go through each item that I now have prepared and to write it out to this receipt that I have. And I have some new lines in there, and I'm also adding the subtotal, sales tax, and the order total, just like we would expect from a normal receipt. So when we console log that, it would look something like this. I have the number, I have the emoji to know what kind it was, I have the price, and I have my subtotal, my sales tax, and my order total. And that is all done in plain vanilla JavaScript. And I think that's really, really important to understand and really cool to see. So I want to say salamat. That means thank you in Tagalog, but it's not over yet. The reason I went through all of these examples with you is because I wanted to show you what I did to learn these methods. Now, for me, I alluded to it before, but I love desserts. I love sugar. Whenever I run into a problem, it's always solved by something sweet. And so I figured that as I started researching some blog posts and Stack Overflow questions and all these things, when you start looking for resources to try to learn these things, you may come across the same issue I had where it's just not sticking. Maybe the way someone is explaining something doesn't work. Maybe you need it in a different format, maybe not in a live presentation like this, maybe in a video that you can pause later on and repeat back and forth. Maybe you need a mix of things. You not only need to see it visually, but you also need to read a blog post to kind of help enforce that and reinforce some of the things and fill in the gaps for where the other resources may fall short. I think this is really, really important to kind of figure out early on. When I first started, I kind of just used what was at my disposal. And it took me a really long time to really fully understand what was going on because the examples I had and the blog posts I read and things, they always had examples, the dreaded foo bar, right? Foo bar. I highly dislike those examples. They don't give you the context. They just make my eyes glaze over. And I really wish more people would, when they do write either documentation or tutorials, anything like that, that they don't use examples like foo and bar or meaningless variable names. To me, that's just adding another layer of complexity and another layer for your head to kind of get used to rather than just focusing on what's at hand. So it's because of these kinds of things that I said, you know what, let me just kind of like switch these things around. Just like I switched the variable names to something that was easier for me to understand, I did that with a lot of these examples. And I did that with desserts. Now, for you, you might be more interested in something else. And this is where I say, find the learning style that works for you. If you know that something, maybe not desserts, but maybe, I don't know, sports or maybe I don't know, I'm drawing a blank at this point. Find something that is engaging to you and then use that in your examples. And I guarantee you that because you're engaged in this subject matter or this topic, and you try to infuse that into your learning, you are going to make better connections in learning whatever concept it is that you're learning because you're associating it to something that you enjoy. And not only do you reinforce those connections because it is something you enjoy, you're more likely to stick with it a little bit longer. I think that's the other part that's so important and why finding these or creating these examples and dessert examples work for me. It's because a lot of programming and a lot of learning in general is you're going to get to places that you get confused or it's too much for you or you feel like giving up. But if you find that thing that enables you to keep going, to not give up, and to keep sticking with it, then you'll have a better chance for not being completely deflated and just giving up. So that said, aside from finding what works for you, what mix of resources works for you, and what topic you can kind of infuse into your learning, I think the other thing that's really important, especially when you're starting out, but even when you're years into your career, is that anytime you're learning something new, do not be afraid to ask questions. I'm running into this issue right now. I have a really big project that I'm doing for my job and I'm super nervous about it and I'm kind of falling back and I'm saying, "Oh no, I don't really want to ask this question," but then I'm just going to kind of get stuck. And even at this point in my career, I still get those feelings. So it's super normal, it's super valid, but I just have to remember to go ahead and ask that question. And in the same fashion, anytime you come across something like that, don't be afraid to ask questions either of your colleagues or someone you know that might be able to help you. It's always better than just kind of moving along and never having that question answered and then not feeling that gap in your knowledge. So, that said, I think I'm ready for questions. You can find me here. Feel free to reach out and connect. And yeah,
All right. Great, Adrienne. Thanks for the talk. And God bless me. Sorry about sneezing, guys. I've tried to mute it myself all ways possible, but I guess you still heard me
I didn't hear it if it helps.
breathing and sneezing for some reason. But yeah, at least you knew I was watching the lecture along with you, and I really enjoyed the talk. So it was great. We do have a lot of questions right now, so
Sure.
Adrienne will start with simple ones. So you do seem
Yes.
like a really organized person in your in education yourself. So I would say, what's the best way to organize your self-study system from your point of view?
That's a great question. For me, I like very structured things. And so what I do is I actually offload that and find resources that have structured it for me. So what that means is when you first start out, you're overwhelmed, right? You're like, I have to learn this, but I don't know what this means. So I also have to learn this. And then where do I begin? And is it what order do I learn things? And is it important to know this before this? You get so stuck in analyzing and trying to figure out what it is you have to do. So the way I organize it is I actually just try to find a resource that has done the hard work of saying, here's what you need to learn. So, for example, with JavaScript, I have a lot of people ask me where do I start? Where do I begin? And that depends on where you are. If you are just starting out and this is your first time into programming and learning, I would recommend Code Academy or Free Code Camp or any of those other really interactive tools because they not only teach you the subject, but they also teach you the basics of programming in general. And that's the right place to start if this is your first foray into JavaScript. Now, if you are like intermediate or you have some experience already or you've been programming for maybe like a year or something and you want to get into more advanced topics, it's the same thing. There's so many resources out there. It's impossible to kind of point and say this is the de facto thing to use. I think it comes back to what I said before, which is you have to find the one that works for you. But in order to answer the question of how do I organize, I try my best and really take advantage of all the really awesome people out there who either share their own study plans and say this is what I learned. Maybe you take advantage of like Free Code Camp or Code Academy or a lot of the other online courses that have already structured table of contents for you and then follow that path. And I think that works best because you don't have to worry about what it is you have to learn. You can just say, here's the list, let me start.
Right. Awesome. Yeah, Free Code Academy and Code Academy in general, great examples. We do the same stuff at Practicum too. We have an
Mhm.
introductory course in JavaScript, and then in the full program, we walk you through all the steps of learning JavaScript. So, spoiler alert, we'll have a new course in JavaScript in the end of May, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, we have a couple of more great questions. For example, this one, Yusuf says that he learns JavaScript and reads documentation and looks at examples, but when he actually tries to apply that in his own project, he feels like he forgets everything that he just learned. Is it normal, and does it happen to everybody?
Yes. So when you first start learning, you come across it's always So you read it, right? And just like I read the definitions on Mozilla, I'm like, okay, I kind of understand it, but not really. So then I transformed that example into something I understood. So I said, okay, now I did it in this dessert example. I kind of understand it a little bit better. And then I think what most of us kind of worry about is that once you do this initial learning or you learn something new, there's almost this expectation that when you start programming, that you remember it from scratch. Like, oh, I know exactly the syntax and this is how you do it. And I don't have to look it up. And I know immediately that this is what I have to use. And it's not going to be like that in the beginning. You do have to use it often, yes, but I think what's more important to remember is that it's okay if you don't remember it initially. When you're working on an application, there's so many other things that you have to consider. Like, how does everything work together as a whole? Is this going to affect performance? How are you going to smartly deploy all of these changes? There's so much more that goes into software development than just this part. And I only say that because I want to drive home the fact that it's okay. It's normal to not know or forget everything or to look it up. We're expected to know so much. And so it's okay if you have to Google 2 or 3 or 6 times for some of the syntax. Now, that's not saying that you can't learn it, but as with most things, the more repetition you do, the more that you use it, the more second nature it becomes to you. When you start reading some lines in code, you can probably think in your head much faster, oh, I know I need to use reduce here because you've seen this problem before, or you've seen this you've used reduce in a similar solution to something else. And so maybe the connection in your brain is much faster to know to use that thing. But it's still okay to say, oh, what was it again, or what was the order? That's completely fine, completely okay, and I do it myself. So there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, I'll totally agree with that. And because we have a guy who wrote a curriculum in JavaScript at Practicum, and the thing he always asks junior developers is that, do you know everything about JavaScript? And if a person says something like, oh yeah, I know JavaScript, then he answers like, it's impossible to know JavaScript, and you have to like always learn new things, and you always have to Google and find out new stuff. So it's totally normal not to know everything about JavaScript. And
Absolutely.
just speaking a little bit more about projects and little apps you can make, what are the best things to make, like this receipt you did? Maybe you have more examples of small apps you can do or small things you can create just to practice JavaScript while learning.
Yes. So I would say I think the best projects are when you try to emulate something. For example, the projects that I like recommending are building like an Instagram clone or a Twitter clone or something that is larger than a to-do app. So a to-do app is great, but everybody does it. And I think that's good to start if you're just getting familiar, but I think the real learning comes for projects that are as large as the ones that I've mentioned. You get to learn a lot of different things in projects of this size and of this complexity than if you just do something a little bit smaller. So even the receipt example that I showed, that was a specific purpose, right? That's just to show you can chain these methods together. And if you were in some dire need of a receipt and for whatever reason didn't have access to libraries or anything, then yeah, you could build one with plain JavaScript. But that said, there are a lot of tools out there. It's always a balance. So I like to say, take a project like that, like build an Instagram clone or build a Twitter clone, and really go into learning how the features are built. For example, what's one thing like infinite scroll on both Instagram and Twitter? You learn a lot by trying to implement that yourself. You learn a lot about responsiveness and sizing on different phones, on different platforms. And you can only learn that with projects that are a little bit more complex and have a little bit more functionality. They give you more things to consider. They really stretch your brain in terms of how would I do that for this particular thing. And I think the reason I like those projects as kind of goal projects to try to build is because you have a good reference for what the end goal should be. You know what Instagram is like, you know how it is to use, you know how Twitter is to use. You have a state, or you have a goal that you can try to achieve. Or even if there's some things you even don't like in Instagram, you like, oh, I wish I had this feature, you can build it yourself. So that's why I like projects that are of this complexity and this size, because it just kind of forces you to learn a lot more and go deeper on a lot of different things that you should consider.
Awesome. Yeah, Twitter and Instagram, these are great examples. And in full program at Practicum, the first project you build in JavaScript is actually a photo app, which kind of looks like Instagram, but it's built in a simpler way. So yeah, it's a great example. And
Nice.
just to take a small break from JavaScript, we have a question about your day at work. Can you probably walk us through a regular day of a developer at work? What do you do? Like, what are the stages of your work?
Sure. So I can speak about well, two different jobs. So it depends what you're doing, right? The last job that I had, we would start the day off, you know, typical, get your coffee, get acquainted with your coworkers, see what's on board. We would work in an agile system, so that meant every 2 weeks we had commitments of things to either create or to fix. And ideally at the start of these weeks, you are assigned those tasks. So for me, when I entered that job, I would get in, get settled in, and pick one of the tasks that was going to be my focus for that day, depending on what kind of task it is. Some are easier, that can be done in like an hour. Some require much more research. No matter what it is, a bulk of my day is really looking at what I'm supposed to do, researching a lot, like really looking and seeing either what is the problem, if it's a bug, really debugging it, and then writing tests to make sure it doesn't happen again. Going and talking to my colleagues about, oh, have you tried this solution, or what do you think of this, or is this going to affect this part of our platform if we do it this way, or if it's a new feature. Again, it's a lot of research and a lot of talking, at least in the environments that I enjoy and what I think are pretty good software development teams. So it's a lot of talking and collaboration with either the people that you're building this thing for or building this feature for, or it's a lot of, again, talking to whoever is going to be the end user for the bug fix that you're doing. And while you're doing these things, depending on the complexity of them, it involves anywhere from writing a lot of code, testing it, making sure it doesn't break the build, researching a lot to see what it is you have to do, coding some more, iterating, take a break, and then do it over and over until essentially all of your tasks are gone and are done and are completed. And again, following agile um, practices, we usually get assigned a certain amount of tasks that are reasonable to do within a 2 week sprint. So take everything I said, and then that can depend on your team, right? Maybe you have 1 week sprints, maybe you have month-long sprints. They're different everywhere. Maybe you don't have sprints and you just work off of tasks. But I think it's the same, where it's just you have stuff to do. You either create it or fix it, do a lot of research, iterate on it, and then keep going until you finish off your checklist. And that's pretty much a typical day. At least that's been in my experience.
Great. Yep. Thanks for walking us through it. And we have one more question about different stacks like min stack and mern stack. Which one do you use? And I guess it also kind of depends on the job you're in, but can you elaborate on that and just speak about stacks a little bit?
Sure. So, way back when I first started with it was the mean stack that was all the rage, right? And for us, that meant Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. And so, even that alone was kind of a good guideline to say these are the things I have to learn, right? There's four technologies that I know need to be in my repertoire that I have to learn. And Mern stack, as I know it, is just it's the same thing, just the instead of Angular, it's React. So I think it depends again on where you work, what your company uses. Um, what I will say is that I think that's a very good mix of things to learn because it kind of touches on the full stack. Node allows you to get familiar with a lot of the back end things you need to learn, and then depending on whatever you use, Angular, React, I don't know if there's no Maven stack with for Vue, right? Whatever front end framework you choose, that could be the area of your expertise, but really that's your tool for creating front end or user interfaces or your experience with front end engineering. And then the Mongo part would be your database experience. I think having a full mix of all of those things is very, very helpful because you don't corner yourself into like just a single skill set or a single area. By learning each of these technologies in the stack, I think you expand your skill set and the tools that you have to build something. You won't get stuck only building, just the what your Instagram clone looks like, but you will also know how to deal with the data on the back end and things like that. So yeah, I don't have any preference. I'm not going to get into that. And I don't think it's really a question. It more depends on where you work and what your company is using.
Yep, that's for sure. And I can also add from the practicum's perspective, we're closer to MERN stack because if you will study with us, you will learn React, Node, Express. So we won't teach you Angular. So we use MERN instead of mean. Yep, and just one simple question we have here is. So when you learn JavaScript, you obviously go for tons of YouTube videos to figure things out, and when you go for them, how not to get into this rabbit hole of just like watching tutorials and not practicing?
Yes, so that's the other thing, right? The tutorial limbo that we all go through. I think it's the best way to get out of it is to really focus on projects. So it's fine if you have to watch one or two or three, but there comes a point where you might have to discipline yourself and say, okay, I've seen all of these things, I've read about it, or I've watched someone else code it, but until you do it yourself, it's never going to stick. You can read it and look at it as many times as you want, and you can even understand what is happening. That's a step in the right direction. But to truly understand what's going on and to really see how it integrates into the bigger picture when you do work on other applications, you need to do it yourself. There's no other way around that. I think what's cool about any resources that involve projects is, well, it's something that's already considered for you, right? So not only do you get taught what you need to get taught, but then you get a chance to put it into practice. So I think the two really are needed in order to be successful.
Right, awesome. So we have a couple of more minutes for our questions. So if you guys have any additional questions, please leave them in the chat. And I just wanted to talk to Adrienne about her transition from C# to JavaScript because we have a similar question about Java. And so all old languages like Java or C# are kind of written in a OOP manner. So when you learn them, you kind of stick to those patterns. And so the question is, does JavaScript make use of classes at all? And is it necessary to use them?
There will be some very opinionated thoughts on that. I think that's one of the benefits of JavaScript is that if it works for your use case and then use it in that way. You can write it in an object oriented fashion, but I think the bigger picture is what is your application doing, and the way that you use JavaScript, whether it's an object oriented fashion or even a functional programming fashion. Does it make sense? Does it make sense for the app? Does it make sense for you as a developer or your team to work on it in this way? What's more maintainable for you? And if there's some kind of um, paradigm or way of writing that makes more sense to you but has no benefit to, say, the end user, if it just makes it more difficult, then I would say don't use or choose that way of writing. But personally, coming from the OOP background, I think that just laid the foundation for how programming can be in a specific language, but it's not the end all be all. Every tool is different, and I try to move away from how do you write, or what tool do you use and what tool can I use for many things, and I'd rather look at what the problem is first, and then say what is the best tool to use for that problem. That's kind of how I approach things.
Awesome. Yeah, we do teach OOP at Practicum too, so even if you won't end up using it, you'll just get the basic concepts of it, because I think it's important for students to know. And I do like this last question. I think I'll ask it and we'll wrap it up. So it's
Sure.
more of like a philosophical one. So since you work with JavaScript every day, do you feel like that the influence of JavaScript is kind of expanding in the world of web development? And have we reached the limits of JavaScript?
Um, It has certainly evolved, yes. I'm actually seeing, I think it's related to another question that we had, but especially in the schools and in STEM curriculum, it kind of started with, like, Scratch, right? The Scratch blocks for the younger kids, and then moving into Python for, even younger kids and middle school kids and elementary and high school kids. And now I'm seeing JavaScript being offered more and more and more, and I think that's a good thing. I think that that has a direct translation to, if you start them off in this particular language, which is obviously used worldwide, they have a better chance of finding a job. Sure. Um, I think the other part of that question of has it reached its limit, I would the best way I can answer that is um, the current release of JavaScript now is probably the best one that we have had to work with as developers. For me personally, I like that we can use arrow functions. I like that we can use the spread operator and make things a little bit more concise. I liked that there are other options, like TypeScript, for example. I think that's the last part to JavaScript that a lot of people complain about, is that there's no, native static type checking in there. So people are using TypeScript. But if I were to make a stand right now, I would say I certainly enjoy JavaScript now way more than the pre ECMA 2015 version. That's for sure.
Right. And then we've briefly touched on TypeScript here, and we just got a question in the chat about necessary libraries or frameworks or things for web developer to get employment or to get a job. And so from React, Angular, TypeScript, and things like that, what do you think are the technologies you have to learn to get employed?
I would say framework doesn't matter. A lot of the web development world, at least from what I've seen, likes to say, "Oh, this is the hottest new thing, and this is what you need to learn." What I would have found, what sticks and what is timeless, is rather than focusing on it. Yes, it's important to choose one. So first of all, I would say just choose one because it doesn't really matter. And to help you choose one, look at the jobs that you want to get and look at the area that you want to work in, or what is being requested for where you want to work. So that's that for the frameworks. What I think is more important is expanding your knowledge on how to build an application more than just the application itself. Like, you need to think about, how do I deploy this? How do I scale this? How does data work with it? What are the best tools to use for this kind of problem? I think there's too much focus on, like the silver bullet that says, if you just learn this, then you can guarantee get a job. And I disagree with that. I think there's so much more to learn. A big part of that is learning how to work with people, learning how to do code reviews properly, learning how to work on a team. These are all just as important as knowing how to write an application in React or Angular. And so I always try to advise people to say, make sure you put some time, or if you're choosing a program or a resource to help learn, that you find one that helps you with that actually gives you that communication and helps you with these other things, not just the language or the framework itself. And so, yeah, I think to set yourself up for success, really think about the bigger picture of what you're building, and think outside the library and the languages. Think of how this application works with the world as a whole, and from beginning to end, how do you get it from your machine to the world, and how do most people use it the most effortlessly. Geez. So that would be my advice.
Right, that's a great answer, and yep, I agree with you on both hard and soft skills here, because, well, you do have to learn programming to do your job, but you also have to learn soft skills to collaborate with people and do code reviews and accept critics and look for new things on the web yourself and study when you're at work. So these are all the necessary skills, and we do teach those at Practicum too. And I think we don't have any other questions, so I think we'll wrap it up with Q&A, and I'll just take a couple of minutes to talk about Practicum in general. So we are an online bootcamp for anyone who wants to learn coding from zero, and as I've said before, we do teach soft skills and things beyond hard skills. So you'll get code review for each of your projects, and you'll learn how to accept critics, so you won't see code review at work for the first time when you arrive there. We also have a tremendous support from the community managers, tutors, and just students you study together. You'll be all in one Slack channel, and you'll have the 24/7 support. And also, we try to create projects on every sprint. We learn in 2-week sprints, so by the end of our 10-month program, you'll have 15 projects in your portfolio, and you can choose the best ones to add to your portfolio, and also build something cool, something new with your knowledge. And of course, the best thing is that we teach online, and we have a distributed team, so the price for our bootcamp is only 20% of the standard bootcamp price. With this in mind, I want to welcome you to our webinars of Practicum. Well, the next one will be with Lauren McCarthy, and she is a creator of P5.js, a great library for artists and graphic designers and everyone who wants to learn JavaScript in a visual way, I would say. I'm a big fan of P5.js myself. And if you get curious about Practicum, we have 20 hours of free intro course, and after this webinar, we'll send you an email so you can take part in our courses and see what job works best for you. We have web development, data analysis, and data science courses, so you can study in each of them for 20 hours for free and see what profession works best for you. So this is the end of my bid, I would say, and I was super excited to host this webinar, and I think Adrienne did a great job with this presentation. And yeah, find your own patterns in learning JavaScript, and it's not only about reading, it's about reworking things and really finding your own ways to understand it. So this is everything I have to say. And Adrienne, if you have anything to add, please.
Yep. Yeah, again, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to check this out. And I do want to thank you all at Practicum. This is why it was very easy for me to partner with you and do this webinar completely free. Like, I'm not getting sponsored for this or anything. I wanted to do this just because I think that their platform is really awesome. This is the first one I've seen actually that focuses on doing projects for their learning program, as well as giving that community of code reviews. That's something super new, and I actually really like that. I have another talk actually of conducting humane code reviews, so that's something that's near and dear to my heart, and I absolutely love that you offer that. That's real world experience that I think not a lot of people get when they go to other resources. So definitely check that out. See that email after this webinar if you're interested. Those are certainly things that would have interested me if I were to be choosing something like this. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions that I did not answer right now, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'm pretty active on there. And if you just remind me that you saw this webinar, if you do ask me something or message me, then I'll be happy to answer your questions. So
All right.
thank you.
Great. Thanks everyone for tuning in today. And yeah, reach out on Twitter and ask us questions. Both Adrienne and me will be happy to answer you. And yeah, thank you. So we'll be stopping our stream right now. See you guys next time.
Bye.